Montana Territory, 1878. The wind cut sharp through the narrow valley outside of Red Elk Ridge, dragging dust across the late summer grass. Kierra Ellard stood barefoot on the porch of the cabin her husband built with his fists and fury, her arms wrapped tight around her ribs. Bruises bloomed beneath the collar of her dress, and thin scars laced the skin where her sleeves met her wrists. She had not cried in 2 days. Not since he broke the last chair over the stove and vanished down the trail with a bottle and his rifle. Inside, her 2 children slept curled together on a straw mattress. Vera, 7, and Vincent, 5. She had hidden them in the cellar when he started shouting. Again, the road was silent now until the sound of hooves broke the stillness. Kierra stepped back, half expecting it to be him, returning with fresh rage. But the rider that crested the hill was not her husband. He was taller, broader in the shoulders, riding a chestnut gelding and wearing a long tan duster. His hat sat low, shadowing his eyes, but he rode easy like a man who had nothing left to prove. He stopped at the edge of the clearing, dismounted slow, and raised his hands. "I am not here for trouble," he said, voice low but clear. "Just water and a quiet place to bed down." Kierra stared, heart pounding. "You should ride on. My husband, he comes back angry." "I can see that," the man said, glancing at the broken porch rail and the dented door frame. His gaze flicked to her arms, to the way she flinched when she spoke. "Name's Garrison O'Dell. I am riding north, saw the smoke from your chimney." She wanted to tell him to leave, but something in his voice, calm, steady, cut through the fear crawling up her throat. "There's a stream behind the barn," she said finally. "You can water your horse there." "Then keep moving." Garrison nodded once, untied his canteen from the saddle and led his horse around the side. She should have gone inside, locked the door. But she stayed on the porch, listening. When he came back around, he paused at the bottom of the steps and looked up at her. "Ma'am," he said gently, "you are not safe here." Her mouth trembled. "I do not have anywhere else to go." "You do now." She could not answer. Her knees buckled and she sat more collapsed onto the top step. Garrison didn't move to touch her. He just stood there, quiet, steady, and didn't look away when tears finally fell onto her cheeks. That night, she let him sleep in the barn. She brought him a blanket and a bowl of stew and said nothing when he looked down at the faded bruises on her wrist. She did not tell him that her husband had once broken a man's jaw for looking at her too long. She did not mention the scars under her ribs or the back of her shoulder. She did not have to. The next morning, Garrison was chopping wood before the sun rose. Vera peeked out the door and whispered, "Mama, is he a cowboy?" Kierra nodded. "Yes." "Is he staying?" Kierra did not answer, but he did stay. Day after day, Garrison found small ways to help, mending the roof, fixing the garden fence, carrying buckets from the well. He never asked for anything. Never stepped too close. Never raised his voice. Every night he slept in the barn. Every morning he was already working before she woke. It took a week before Vera handed him a drawing she had made, a picture of their cabin with a horse and a man smiling beside it. He grinned, the first real one she had seen. "That me?" Vera nodded. Vincent tugged his sleeve. "Are you gonna marry our mama?" Kierra dropped the pot she was holding. Garrison cleared his throat and crouched beside the little boy. "That is not how it works, partner. Your mama gets to choose who stays." Vincent frowned. "But you are not mean." Garrison's jaw tightened. "No, I am not." That night, Kierra stood at the edge of the barn door. Garrison was brushing down his horse by lamplight, and he looked up when he heard her. "I should not have let you stay," she said softly. He nodded. "Maybe not. But I am glad you did." He set the brush down, walked to the open doorway, and leaned against the frame. "You do not have to be afraid of me." "I know," she said. "That is what scares me." Garrison's voice dropped. "He ever puts a hand on you again, I will stop him." Kierra felt her breath catch. "He'll never touch you again," Garrison said, his voice like steel wrapped in warmth. "Not while I am breathing." She looked at him, really looked, and something cracked inside her chest. Not fear, not panic. Just the memory of what it felt like to stand next to someone safe. "I do not want you to leave," she whispered. "I won't." And he did not. 2 days later, her husband came back, drunk. Armed, he stumbled into the yard shouting her name, rifle slung across his back, eyes wild. Kierra shoved her children under the floorboards and stepped into the yard. Garrison was already there, standing between her and the man who had once promised to love her. "You got 5 seconds to walk away," Garrison said calmly. Her husband spat on the dirt. "She belongs to me." "No," Kierra said, stepping out from behind Garrison. Her voice shook, but her hands were steady. "I do not." The man raised his rifle. Garrison moved faster. The fight was quick, brutal. Her husband never had a chance. Garrison disarmed him, drove him into the dirt, and stood over him without laying another blow. "You come back here," Garrison said, "and I will bury you myself." Bloodied, humiliated, the man ran. He did not return. Later, when the children were asleep and the night was quiet again, Kierra found Garrison outside, washing the blood from his knuckles in the water trough. She walked to him and reached out, her fingers brushing his. "You really meant it," she said. He looked at her, eyes soft now. "Every word." Kierra leaned in, slow, unsure, until he met her halfway. The kiss was gentle, real. And when she pulled back, her voice broke into a smile. "I think I'm falling in love with you." Garrison touched her cheek. "Then let me fall with you." They stood there a long time beneath the stars, not afraid anymore. The rains came late that year, slow and steady, soaking deep into the roots of the land. By early September, the fields behind the cabin had softened enough for planting fall greens, and the woods along the ridge turned gold at the edges. Kierra stood at the edge of the garden with dirt beneath her fingernails and a bundle of beet greens in her hands. Behind her, Vera was showing Vincent how to braid husks for kindling, their laughter skipping across the yard like wind through dry leaves. Garrison was cutting fence posts near the tree line, shirt sleeves rolled, his hands practiced and sure. She watched him from where she knelt, not hiding the way her gaze lingered now. He hadn't touched her not once without her reaching first, but he carried each day like a promise, and that steadiness had begun to settle into her bones. She rose slowly, knees stiff, and walked toward the shed where she stored the root vegetables. He noticed her movement and set his axe down, brushing sawdust from his palms as he approached. "You're limping," he said, voice low but not accusing. "Old break," she replied. "Took wrong back step when I was pregnant with Vincent." He was quiet a moment. "You want me to hitch the wagon for town? I can take the furs in, pick up flour." She leaned against the doorframe and shook her head. "Not yet. I'm not ready to be looked at again." He didn't argue. He just nodded once and stepped back. Later, after supper, when the children were collecting pine cones to carve, Garrison brought out a battered tin box and set it on the porch rail beside her. "My mother kept this," he said. "Carried it through Kansas when we left Missouri. Said it was for things worth keeping." Kierra opened the lid and saw a folded length of lace, a pencil sketch of a frontier chapel, and a silver ring dulled with age. "Your folks still living?" she asked. He shook his head. "Caught fever near Fort Scott." "I buried them myself." She traced the edge of the sketch with one finger, careful not to smudge the charcoal. "Why'd you show me this?" "Because I never showed it to anyone else." She looked at him for a long moment, then reached inside her apron pocket and pulled out a small cloth bundle. Inside was a broken brooch with a blue glass stone, the only thing her mother had left her before the trail west swallowed them both. She laid it beside the ring. "Then I guess we're even," she said softly. They sat in the dusk, quiet but not alone. The mountains beyond the ridge turned violet under the fading light, and the breeze carried the scent of pine and damp bark. A week passed before Kierra agreed to go into town. She wore her hair pinned back, a clean dress that Vera had helped mend, and the boots she hadn't touched since last winter. Garrison hitched the mare to the wagon and lifted Vincent into the back beside the flour sacks. Riding through the valley, Kierra kept her gaze ahead, jaw set. Garrison didn't speak until they passed the old stagecoach marker. "I'll walk beside you if you want," he said, "or go in ahead and keep him busy." "I need to be seen," she replied. "I just don't want to be stared at." Outside the general store, she stepped down from the wagon alone. Garrison waited across the street, leaning on the post rail outside the smithy. He didn't look toward her, didn't follow. Inside, Mrs. Albright behind the counter blinked twice, then offered a small, cautious smile. "Well, Kierra Ellard," she said. "We wondered what had become of you." "I need cracked wheat and turpentine," Kierra said, setting the coin on the counter, "and another bar of strong soap." The woman glanced at the bruises still faint across her collarbone, said nothing, and wrapped the items quick. When Kierra turned to leave, a man near the stove tipped his hat. "Ma'am." She nodded once, tight and formal, then stepped back into the daylight. She didn't breathe easy until the wagon was moving again, the sound of wheels and hooves drowning out the weight of eyes. That night, Garrison didn't say a word as she washed her hands at the basin and pulled her shawl tighter around her shoulders. But when she stepped outside to check the smokehouse, he followed, holding a cloth-wrapped parcel. "I saw you pick up a spool of thread," he said. "Thought maybe this'd be useful." Inside the cloth was a length of dark cotton with faded roses, the kind used for warm dresses. "I traded some fur for it," he added. She didn't speak, just reached out and touched the fabric, slow and reverent. "I don't know how to make a woman feel worth something," he said, "but I'll learn if you'll let me." She took the cloth in both hands, pressed it to her chest, and looked up at him. "I feel it already," she said. "Every day you don't leave." He didn't answer, but he didn't have to. His hand found hers, calloused and warm, and she didn't pull away. They stood like that until the stars came out, until the cold pressed in and the lantern flickered low inside the window. The world might never ask after them, but in that small clearing between mountain and river, something good had begun to grow. By early October, frost clung to the fence rails each morning, and the scent of wood smoke folded into the rhythm of the days. Kierra stood in the pasture with a bucket of oats, watching the mare nuzzle into Garrison's palm while Vincent ran circles around them pretending to be a buffalo. Vera sat on the fence post nearby, threading berries onto a line of twine for the smokehouse. Kierra's sleeves were rolled high, and though the bruises beneath had faded weeks ago, the skin there still drew her thoughts when the wind blew cold. But the quiet between her and Garrison had taken root in a steadier way. It wasn't silence from fear anymore. It was the kind that asked nothing but held everything. When the children went inside for supper, Garrison stayed behind, fixing a saddle girth that had frayed near the buckle. He worked with calm precision, his brow furrowed in thought. "You've been quiet," Kierra said, setting the empty bucket down beside the barn wall. "I got a letter yesterday," her stomach tensed. "From who? My brother in Idaho, said the land's been good to him. He bought a small parcel, wants me to come work it with him." She hesitated. "You thinking of going?" He looked up then, straight into her. "I was before." She crossed her arms, more to still the sudden tremor than out of defiance. "Before what?" "Before I knew what it felt like to be wanted without being owed." The wind caught her hair, pulled it loose from behind her ears. She stepped closer, just enough that her skirt brushed his boot. "What's he like?" she asked. "Used to be kind. After the war, he went quiet. We wrote every winter, but I haven't seen him in 9 years. You miss him, some days, but not the life that waited there." She crouched beside him, picking at a frayed edge on the saddle cloth. "You could still go." "I could," he said. "But I'd be leaving something true behind," her voice caught. "Is it this place or me?" Garrison set the leather down. "I never cared much for land. I care about where I'm looked at like I belong." Kierra stood slowly, brushing dust from her palms. "Stay for harvest, then. If the snow comes early, you'll have a reason not to ride out." "Is that your way of asking me to stay?" Her voice was steady. "It's my way of saying I'd like to know if you meant it. That you wouldn't leave unless I asked you to." Garrison nodded once, then stood and pulled the saddle strap tight. "Then I'll stay." That night, while the children slept under patched quilts, Kierra woke to the sound of wind battering the shutters. She lit the oil lamp and padded barefoot to the hearth. Garrison had taken to sleeping inside by the fire ever since the first frost. She found him there, blanket drawn over his shoulders, boots set neatly beside him. He stirred when she bent to add a log to the coals. "Cold," he murmured. She looked down at him. "I keep dreaming about the night he first broke my ribs. I thought it would stop now that he's gone, but it hasn't." Garrison sat up slowly. "Dreams hold on longer than pain does. I'm tired of carrying it." He reached for her hand, not to pull, just to offer it. She took it. She settled beside him on the rug, and when he laid the blanket over her shoulders, she leaned against his chest. His arm came around her, slow, careful, like something sacred. "I don't want to be afraid when I'm touched," she whispered. "You won't be." "Not by me." They stayed there until dawn painted light across the floorboards. No rush, no shame. Just warmth between them that asked for nothing but time. By late autumn, the cabin had changed. There was a hand-carved coat hook by the door and a new cradle built from pine slats beside the hearth. Garrison had made it without saying why. But when Kierra found herself retching into the wash basin one morning, she understood. She told him while he was fixing the porch rail, her expression unreadable. "I'm with child." He paused, hammer in hand. "Is it mine?" She nodded once. The air was quiet between them, and then he reached for her waist, pulling her close with reverence. "Then we build a life around that. I don't want pity. You won't get any, just the truth." He kissed her then, not urgent, not unsure, just steady, like every vow he'd made had led to this. She rested her forehead against his. "I want to marry you, but not in the way I married before, not out of fear. I wouldn't let you." "Then let's marry in spring, when the land thaws and nothing is hidden." Garrison smiled, soft, sincere, and pressed her hand to his chest. "I'll be here. Every morning, every frost, every thaw." And he was, through winter's hush and the slow ache of waiting, they stayed, not because they had to, but because they chose to, together. The snow lingered longer than usual that year, clinging in gray banked drifts beneath the porch and weighing down the branches that lined the ridge above the creek. The wind had turned less sharp, but it still carried the kind of cold that settled deep and didn't leave easy. Inside the cabin, the fire burned low and steady, and Kierra bent over a length of calico, her needle threading through seams that would shape into a dress for Vera come spring. Garrison had gone out before first light to check the trap lines north of the ridge. He'd taken Vincent with him this time, wrapped in 2 coats and tucked beside him on the sled. Vera stayed behind, a book open in her lap, her lips moving silently across the words. Kierra hadn't taught her to read. That had come from the schoolhouse days before their life had shrunk down to fear and silence. The girl had kept her letters, though, held them close like flint to dry kindling. A knock sounded at the door. Not quick, just one solid knock, then stillness. Kierra stood, hand pressing down against the child inside her, and crossed the room. She opened the door halfway. A middle-aged man stood there, bundled in a wool coat with a rawhide pouch slung over one shoulder. His beard was patchy, cheeks windburnt. He looked past her into the cabin, then lowered his eyes quickly. "I'm looking for Garrison O'Dell." Kierra didn't move. "He's not here." The man nodded slowly, shifting his weight from one boot to the other. "I'm his brother." She stepped out onto the porch, pulling the door nearly closed behind her. "He said you were in Idaho." "Was." The man glanced toward the barn, then back at her. "Got word through a freight rider that he'd settled here. Figured I'd see for myself." "What for?" The man scratched his beard, not meeting her gaze. "He's all I got left. Thought maybe it was time to mend what we didn't say." Kierra studied him. He carried himself like someone used to being alone but not proud of it. She didn't answer, only motioned toward the woodpile. "There's coffee inside. He'll be back before dusk." The man nodded and followed her in without speaking again. Vera looked up, wary, but kept quiet. By the time Garrison returned, the sun was low behind the ridge, casting long blue shadows across the snow. Vincent raced ahead, cheeks pink, holding a rabbit by the ears. Kierra met Garrison at the edge of the porch. "He's inside," she said. Garrison didn't ask who. Just handed her the sled rope and walked in. She watched the door close behind him, the latch clicking soft. Inside, the brothers stood a pace apart, neither reaching for the other. I wasn't sure you'd still be alive, the man said. After the war, I thought maybe you'd gone under for good. You stayed gone long enough, Garrison replied. I was angry. So was I. Kierra didn't go in. She took Vincent to the barn instead, helped him skin and stretch the rabbit, her hands steady even when her thoughts pulled toward the cabin. When she returned, the brothers were sitting at the table, coffee cooling between them. Silence hung heavy but not bitter. Later, after the children had gone to sleep and Garrison's brother had settled in the loft above the barn, Kierra lit the lamp low and sat beside Garrison near the hearth. Are you glad he came? I don't know yet. He turned the tin cup in his hands, not drinking. He left me in Kansas with a shovel and a broken wagon 3 weeks after we buried our folks. Kierra didn't speak. She just waited, letting the quiet stretch. He said he was going to find work in Topeka and send for me. Never did. You think he meant to come back? Garrison looked over at her. I think he meant to forget. She reached for his hand under the table, her fingers curling between his. Then maybe this time he won't. The next morning, Garrison's brother helped mend the chicken coop. He worked in silence but not discomfort. Vera watched him from the porch, a bundle of twine in her lap. Does he have a family? She asked. Kierra shook her head. Not that he mentioned. Vera looked toward the barn. He seems sad. Some folks carry sorrow like a coat they never take off. Vera nodded, then returned to her twine. That evening after supper, the man stood near the fire with his hat in his hands. You got a good thing here, he said. You built something clean. Garrison didn't answer. I'm heading west. There's land near Penn-Doré that's still unclaimed. Figured I'd try there. Garrison nodded. You'll find what you're looking for. I don't know. He looked over at Kierra. But I know what I missed. And I won't miss it again. He left at first light, his boots crunching softly through the frost. Garrison watched him go but didn't follow. Kierra came to stand beside him, her shawl wrapped tight. Do you hate him? No, Garrison said. But I don't know him anymore. She leaned into him, her head against his shoulder. He tried. Garrison, that's something? Maybe. They stood there a long while, watching the ridge go blue with morning. Later that day, Garrison built a cradle rocker beside the hearth. Kierra watched him measure the pieces, slow and sure, and something inside her settled. He looked up once, catching her gaze. I want to give this child a name that means beginning. She smiled, eyes soft. Then we will. Outside, the snow had begun to melt in the sun's return. The land, like them, was learning how to live again. By the time the snow melted clean from the bend in the creek and the ground thawed enough for planting, Kierra's belly had rounded beneath her apron. She moved slower now, but with a calm that came from knowing each day had brought her closer to a life she had chosen. Garrison had finished setting the new fence posts along the south pasture, and the barn roof no longer leaked. He carved a row of initials into the beam above the front door, his, hers, Vera's, Vincent's, and left space for one more. One afternoon, she sat on a stool outside the smokehouse, peeling dried willow bark for tincture, when Garrison returned from town with a folded paper in his breast pocket. You mentioned a preacher, he said, crouching beside her. I asked after him. Kierra brushed bark filings from her lap. And he'll come next month, said he'd ride up from Deer Lodge once the road over the ridge clears. She met his eyes. We'll marry with the children beside us. Not out of need, but because it's time, he nodded. I want it to be the first day of something, not the end of anything. That evening, Vera stitched lace into the hem of Kierra's dress with small, careful hands, tongue tucked to one side in concentration. Vincent polished a pair of boots too big for him, insisting he'd wear them when the preacher came. When the sky turned soft with April light, they gathered under the cottonwood tree at the edge of the pasture. Their nearest neighbor, a widow named Mrs. Callahan, watched the children while Kierra and Garrison stood close with the preacher between them. He wore a threadbare coat and held a leather-bound book with cracked corners. His voice was low, worn by wind, but steady as he spoke the words that bound them. Kierra didn't tremble. She only looked at Garrison and saw, in his eyes, every quiet promise he had kept since the moment he first stood between her and harm. I do, she said, not as a vow, but as a truth already lived. When they kissed, it was not shy. It was the kind of kiss that closed the door on everything that came before and opened it to something new. That night, after the children had fallen asleep curled together on the pallet beside the hearth, Kierra and Garrison sat on the porch step, her head resting against his shoulder. "Did you ever think we'd get here?" she asked. "No," he said, "but I never wanted anything more." She let her fingers trace the back of his hand, memorizing the calluses and warmth. "The child will come in summer," she said. "We'll need a name for her." "You're sure it's a girl?" "I feel it." He leaned in, voice low. "Then we'll name her after no one. Let her carry something all her own." They planted the spring garden together, Garrison tilling the soil while Kierra dropped seed with Vera beside her. Vincent chased field mice from the rows with a carved stick and a shout that echoed like a war cry. In June, the child came just before the storm rolled in from the north. Rain drummed the roof while Kierra labored, Vera wiping her brow and Mrs. Callahan pressing warm cloths to her back. Garrison held her hand, silent but unmoving, until the cry broke through the wind. "A girl," Mrs. Callahan said, laying the child in Kierra's arms. She was perfect, small and fierce, with dark hair and steady lungs. Garrison touched the baby's hand and she wrapped her fingers tight around his thumb. Kierra looked up at him. "Her name is Junia," he nodded, then bent to kiss her forehead. "Junia O'Dell," he said. "She belongs to no one else's past." They buried the old brooch and Garrison's mother's ring beneath the cottonwood tree that had witnessed their vows. Not to forget, but to mark the end of what had been carried too long. From the soil, they planted a circle of sage and wild columbine. When Junia took her first steps the following spring, she walked straight toward the barn, unsteady but determined. Vincent ran to fetch her, laughing so hard he fell over in the grass. Vera read books aloud beneath the porch awning, her voice clear and sure, correcting Garrison when he mispronounced the longer words. On their second wedding anniversary, Garrison built a rocking chair from pine he felled himself. He placed it beside the hearth and carved a small flower into the backrest. "It's not much," he said, setting it down. Kierra sat in it, Junia asleep in her arms. "It's everything." The cabin never grew bigger, but it grew warmer. Joy didn't arrive fast or loud. It settled in like sunlight through a window, slow and certain. No one came looking for her husband again. He was buried quiet in memory and never spoken of. The children never asked. Years passed and the garden stretched wider. Vera took in mending from town. Vincent learned to trap and skin with a precision Garrison admired. Junia followed her mother's footsteps, always barefoot, always curious. In time, the children built homes of their own nearby. But every Sunday they came back to the cabin, where Garrison and Kierra still lived, still holding hands when no one was looking. They grew old without sorrow. Not because life was easy, but because they had chosen each other and never once turned away. And when Garrison passed, years later, after a quiet morning tending the fence, Kierra laid him to rest beneath the cottonwood tree, beside the ring and the brooch and all the things they had buried so they could begin. She lived on. Not because she had to, but because love like theirs doesn't end, it just lingers in the soil, in the wind, in the sound of a baby's first cry. And when she passed, gently with Junia beside her and the fire burning low, the world did not mourn them with sadness. It remembered them in the way the ridge still held the sun at dusk, and in the way two hands could build a whole life from nothing but trust and time. They had lived fully, together, and they had loved completely.